The winter wind cut through the streets of downtown Portland like a knife. People hurried past with their collars up and their heads down, eager to escape the cold. But for Robert Hayes, there was no escape. This was just another day. Robert sat on his usual spot near the entrance of the Gateway Shopping Center. His back pressed against the cold brick wall and a worn cardboard sign rested beside him. The sign didn't say much, just a simple message asking for help. Most people didn't even look at it anymore. After 3 years on these streets, Robert had become invisible. He pulled his old jacket tighter around his shoulders. The jacket had seen better days. So had Robert. At 58 years old, his face was weathered and lined, his beard unkempt and graying. His hands, rough and calloused, poked out from sleeves that were too short. Those hands had once been his pride. Now they were just tools for survival, holding a coffee cup that strangers occasionally dropped coins into. The shopping center was busy that afternoon. It was the week before Thanksgiving, and everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere important. Robert watched them all. The young couples laughing together, the families with children pulling at their parents' hands, the business people talking urgently into their phones. Each person was living a life that felt impossibly far from his own. Across the street, something was happening at the Riverside Community Center. Robert had noticed the activity all morning. People were carrying chairs inside. Someone was unloading speakers from a van. Colorful banners hung from the windows announcing some kind of charity event. The irony wasn't lost on Robert. A charity event happening right across from a homeless man who could use some charity himself. Around 2 in the afternoon, the music started. Robert could hear it drifting across the street whenever the community center's doors opened. Piano music. His chest tightened at the sound. He hadn't heard live piano music in so long. Without meaning to, he found himself staring at the building's windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the instrument inside. A woman rushed out of the community center. She looked stressed, her phone pressed to her ear. Robert could hear bits of her conversation even from across the street. Something about a pianist not showing up, a schedule falling apart, an event starting in 30 minutes with no music. The woman, whose name was Linda Thompson, ended her call and stood there looking defeated. She was the event coordinator, and this was supposed to be her biggest fundraiser of the year. Local businesses had donated. The mayor was coming. And now, with no pianist, the whole carefully planned evening was falling apart. Linda took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. That's when she noticed Robert. At first, she saw what everyone else saw, a homeless man sitting against a wall. But then she noticed something different. He wasn't looking down at the ground like he usually did. He was staring at the community center with an intensity she couldn't quite understand. More specifically, he seemed to be staring at the windows where the piano was visible inside. Something about his expression caught her attention. It wasn't the vacant stare she'd seen on so many faces. There was focus there, recognition, almost like longing. Linda had lived in Portland her whole life. She'd walked past homeless people thousands of times. She'd donated to shelters and volunteered at soup kitchens. But she'd rarely stopped to really look at them as individuals. Today, though, something made her cross the street. Robert didn't notice her approaching at first. He was lost in memories, triggered by those few notes of piano music he'd heard. Memories of a different life. A life where his hands moved across keys instead of holding a cup for spare change. A life where he wore a suit and tie instead of layers of threadbare clothing. A life before everything fell apart. "Excuse me," Linda said softly. Robert looked up, startled. People didn't usually talk to him unless they were telling him to move along. "Yes?" His voice was rough from disuse. He didn't talk much these days. Linda hesitated. This was crazy, but something in her gut told her to ask. "I noticed you looking at the community center." At the piano through the window, Robert's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't realized he'd been that obvious. "I have a strange question," Linda continued. Do you know how to play piano?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Robert's mind raced. How could she possibly know? How could she see what no one else had seen in 3 years? I used to," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. "A long time ago." Linda's heart began to beat faster. How long ago? Robert was quiet for a moment. 15 years. Maybe more. I don't really keep track anymore. Were you good? A sad smile crossed Robert's face. It was the first time he'd smiled in months. I was a music teacher. I played professionally, gave concerts, he paused. But that was another life, another person. Linda made a decision that would change everything. We're having an event today. Our pianist didn't show up. I know this is an unusual request, but would you be willing to play for us? Just for an hour. We can pay you something. Robert's hands began to tremble. Fear washed over him. He hadn't played in so long. What if he couldn't do it anymore? What if his fingers didn't remember? What if he embarrassed himself in front of all those people? I don't think that's a good idea, he said, shaking his head. Look at me. I'm not. I can't. I understand, Linda said gently. But I saw how you were looking at that piano. Like it meant something to you. And right now I'm desperate. Please, just think about it. Robert looked down at his hands again. These hands that had once brought music to life. These hands that had taught students how to find beauty in the keys. These hands that had played at his own wedding, making his wife cry happy tears. His wife, Catherine. She'd loved hearing him play. She'd sit for hours just listening, saying it was the most beautiful sound in the world. But Catherine was gone now. She'd been gone for 16 years, and when she left, she'd taken Robert's music with her. I'm scared, Robert admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Linda sat down beside him on the cold concrete. I know, but what if you still have it? What if the music is still in there, just waiting? Robert closed his eyes. Could he do it? Could he walk into that warm building full of people who would stare at his appearance and judge him before he played a single note? Could his fingers remember what his heart had never forgotten? If I do this, he said slowly, people are going to stare. They're going to judge. Let them stare, Linda said. Let them judge, and then show them who you really are. Robert sat there for what felt like an eternity. The cold wind blew. The shoppers hurried past, and somewhere across the street a piano sat waiting. Finally, with shaking hands, Robert pushed himself up from the ground. His legs were stiff from sitting, and he stumbled slightly. Linda reached out to steady him. Okay, he said quietly. I'll try. The walk across the street felt like the longest journey of Robert's life. Every step was heavy with doubt. Linda walked beside him, offering quiet encouragement, but Robert could barely hear her over the pounding of his own heart. As they approached the community center's glass doors, Robert caught his reflection. He stopped cold. The man staring back at him was a stranger. Dirty clothes, messy hair, a face marked by years of hardship and sleeping rough. This wasn't the man who used to perform in concert halls. This wasn't the respected teacher who wore pressed shirts and polished shoes. I can't, Robert said, turning away. Look at me. I'll ruin your event. Linda gently touched his arm. Robert, listen to me. Those people in there, they came to support a good cause. They came to help people who are struggling. Let them see that those people have names, have stories, have gifts to share. Robert wanted to run. Every instinct told him to go back to his spot against the wall where he was safe in his invisibility. But something deeper pulled him forward. Maybe it was the memory of Catherine. Maybe it was the thought of his hands on those keys again. Maybe he was just tired of being invisible. Okay, he whispered. But I need a minute. Linda nodded and opened the door. Warmth rushed out to meet them. Robert hadn't felt real warmth in so long that it almost hurt. They stepped into the lobby, and immediately Robert felt eyes on him. A well-dressed couple standing near the coat check looked up. Their conversation stopped mid-sentence. The woman's hand went to her purse instinctively. The man's eyes narrowed. Robert saw it all. He'd seen those looks 1,000 times. Linda? A man in a suit approached quickly. He was one of the event organizers. What's going on? Did you find someone to play? Yes, Tom. This is Robert. He's a professional pianist. Tom looked at Robert. His expression said everything. Confusion, doubt, concern. Linda, can I talk to you for a second? He pulled her aside, but Robert could still hear them. You can't be serious. Where did you find him? He was sitting outside. Tom, he used to be a music teacher. He played professionally. Used to be. Linda, we have the mayor coming. We have donors here. We can't just bring someone off the street and what? He's still a person, Tom. He has a name. and he's willing to help us. Robert stood there trying to make himself smaller. He wanted to disappear into the walls. Around the lobby, more people were noticing him now. Whispers spread like ripples in water. He caught fragments of conversations. Is that a homeless man? What's he doing here? Should someone call security? A little girl, maybe 6 years old, walked up to Robert. Her mother tried to pull her back, but the girl was curious. Why are your clothes dirty? She asked innocently. Robert looked down at her. There was no judgment in her eyes, just genuine curiosity. I don't have a washing machine, he said softly. Oh, the girl said. We have one. It's really loud. Katie, come here, her mother said firmly, pulling the child away. She gave Robert a look that made him feel like something dangerous. Linda finished her conversation with Tom and came back. Robert could see that she'd won, but barely. Ready? She asked. No, Robert said honestly, but let's do it anyway. They walked through the lobby toward the main hall. With each step, Robert felt more exposed, more judged. People moved out of his way, not wanting to get too close. He heard a woman say to her husband, I can't believe they're letting him in here. What if he's dangerous? The main hall was beautiful. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the space. A stage stood at the front, and there, catching the light from the chandeliers above, was a grand piano. A Steinway. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen a piano like that in years. It was beautiful, perfect, and completely terrifying. I'll introduce you, Linda said. Just be yourself. Before Robert could respond, Linda walked to the microphone on stage. The room gradually quieted down. Robert stood at the side of the stage, very aware that everyone could see him, very aware of how out of place he looked. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda began. Thank you all for coming today. As many of you know, we've had a small change in our program. Our scheduled pianist couldn't make it, but sometimes life surprises us. I'd like to introduce you to Robert Hayes. Robert is going to play for us today. She gestured for Robert to come up. His legs felt like concrete. Move, he told himself. Just move. He climbed the steps to the stage. The lights were bright. The audience was a sea of faces, and none of them looked friendly. They looked skeptical, uncomfortable. Some looked disgusted. Robert walked to the piano and sat down on the bench. It had been so long since he'd sat on a piano bench. The position felt foreign and familiar all at once. He looked down at the keys, 88 keys, black and white. He knew every single one. His hands hovered above them, shaking. 15 years since he'd played. What if he'd forgotten? What if his fingers didn't work the way they used to? What if he humiliated himself in front of all these people who already thought he was nothing? In the audience, he could hear whispers. This is ridiculous. I can't believe we're supposed to listen to this. He probably doesn't even know how to play. Robert closed his eyes. The voices faded, and in the darkness behind his eyelids he saw Catherine. She was sitting in their old living room, the one they'd lost when the medical bills piled up. She was smiling at him the way she always did when he played. Play from your heart, she used to say. That's where the real music lives. Robert's hands stopped shaking. He thought about everything that had led him here. The cancer that took Catherine, the depression that followed, the job he lost, the apartment he couldn't afford, the slow slide into homelessness that felt both sudden and inevitable. He thought about the last time he'd played. It was at Catherine's funeral. He'd played her favorite piece even though he could barely see the keys through his tears. After that day, he couldn't bring himself to touch a piano again. It hurt too much. The music reminded him of everything he'd lost. But sitting here now, Robert realized something. The music didn't just remind him of loss. It reminded him of love, of joy, of the man he used to be, the man he still was, underneath all the dirt and pain and years of hardship. He placed his fingers on the keys. They felt cool and smooth. Perfect. The room was completely quiet now. Waiting, judging, doubting. Robert took a deep breath. In his mind, he heard Catherine's voice one more time. Show them, Robert. Show them who you are. And then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air. Soft, gentle, like a whisper. Robert's fingers remembered what his mind had tried to forget. They moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for hands so weathered and rough. The muscle memory was still there. More than that, the emotion was still there. Every note carried 15 years of pain, loss, and longing. Every phrase told a story of a man who had fallen but never quite broken. In the audience, the whispers stopped. The skeptical faces changed. Eyes that had been hard with judgment began to soften. Because what they were hearing wasn't just music. It was a human soul speaking in the only language it had left. An elderly man in the front row felt tears on his cheeks. He didn't know why. He just knew that this music was touching something deep inside him. A woman who had pulled her daughter away from Robert earlier sat very still, her hand over her mouth. She was remembering her own father who had died last year. He used to play piano too. Tom, the organizer who had doubted Linda's decision, stood frozen by the back wall. He had been ready to end this after one song, to thank Robert politely and usher him out. But now he couldn't imagine stopping this. Not for anything. Linda stood at the side of the stage with tears streaming down her face. She had taken a chance on a homeless man sitting against a wall, and he was giving everyone in this room something precious, something real, something that money couldn't buy. Robert played on, lost in the music. His eyes were closed. He wasn't in the community center anymore. He was everywhere he'd ever played. Every concert hall, every classroom, every quiet evening at home with Catherine listening. All of it came flooding back. And for the first time in 15 years, Robert Hayes wasn't invisible anymore. The nocturne flowed through the hall like water. Each note was perfect, but more than that, each note was alive. Robert's fingers danced across the keys with a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere beyond him. This wasn't just muscle memory. This was his soul speaking. In the audience, people had stopped moving entirely. Nobody reached for their phones. Nobody whispered to their neighbors. The entire room was held captive by the music pouring from this man they'd dismissed moments ago. Margaret Chen sat at table 7. She was 73 years old and had come to the event mostly out of obligation. Her son was on the organizing committee. But now, listening to Robert play, she was transported back 60 years. She remembered her own piano lessons as a child. Her teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had taught her this exact piece. Margaret hadn't thought about those lessons in decades. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks and she didn't bother wiping them away. 3 tables over, a businessman named Derek Wilson was supposed to be checking his email. His phone sat on the table, forgotten. Derek had been having the worst week of his life. His company was failing. He'd laid off 15 people on Monday. Good people with families. The guilt was eating him alive. But something about this music made him feel less alone, like someone else understood what it meant to lose everything. The young mother who had pulled her daughter Katie away from Robert earlier sat very still. Her name was Jennifer. She worked 2 jobs to keep her family fed. Her husband had left 6 months ago and every day was a struggle. She was so tired, so angry at the world. But listening to this music, something inside her softened. She reached over and held Katie's small hand, squeezing gently. Katie looked up at her mother with wide eyes. "Mommy, why is everyone crying?" Jennifer wiped her own tears. "Because it's beautiful, honey. Really beautiful." Robert transitioned from the nocturne into another piece. This one wasn't Chopin. This one was his own composition. He'd written it 20 years ago during the happiest time of his life. It was called Catherine's Song, though the audience didn't know that. The melody started soft and sweet like morning sunlight. It built slowly, adding layers of complexity. In the music, you could hear a love story. You could hear laughter, joy, the feeling of coming home to someone who made everything better. Robert's eyes remained closed as he played. He could see Catherine so clearly now. Her smile, the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. The sound of her laugh. God, he missed that laugh. They'd met at a music school where he taught. She was the school's administrator. Organized and practical where he was creative and scattered. Opposites that fit together perfectly. Their first date had been a disaster. He'd forgotten to make reservations and they'd ended up eating hot dogs from a street vendor in the rain. But Catherine had laughed the whole time, and Robert knew right then that he wanted to hear that laugh for the rest of his life. The music shifted. The melody grew darker. Minor chords crept in where major ones had been. This was the part Robert had added later after Catherine got sick. The cancer had been aggressive. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. They'd had 6 months. 6 months to say goodbye to 30 years of marriage. In the audience, people felt the change in the music. The joy was still there, but now it was tinged with something else. Sadness, loss, but also gratitude. Like the music was saying, it hurt to lose her, but I'm grateful I got to love her at all. An older man named Henry sat near the front. He was 81 and he'd lost his own wife 2 years ago. They'd been married for 57 years. People kept telling him it would get easier, but it hadn't. Not really. Listening to Robert's music, Henry felt understood for the first time since his wife's funeral. Someone else knew. Someone else carried the same weight. Henry's shoulders shook as he cried. He didn't care who saw, the music kept building. Robert's hands moved faster now, more urgently. This was the part about what came after. The medical bills that buried him. The depression that made getting out of bed impossible. The job he lost because he couldn't function. The apartment he couldn't afford. The friends who stopped calling. The slow, terrible slide from a normal life into nothing. But even in the darkest part of the music, there was something else. A thread of hope that wouldn't quite die. A melody that kept trying to break through the darkness. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Linda stood backstage, tears streaming down her face. She'd taken a chance on Robert, but she'd had no idea. No idea he was this good. No idea his music would carry this much power. She thought about all the times she'd walked past homeless people without really seeing them. How many of them had stories like Robert's? How many had been someone before life knocked them down? Tom, the organizer who'd tried to stop this, stood next to her. I was wrong, he whispered. I was so wrong, Linda just nodded. There were no words. On stage, Robert was approaching the end of his composition. The music began to resolve. Not into happiness exactly, but into something like acceptance. The pain was still there, but so was the memory of love. The loss was still there, but so was the gratitude. Life had broken him, but it hadn't destroyed him. Not completely. The final notes came slowly, deliberately, each one hanging in the air before fading. And then, with one last gentle chord, the music stopped. Silence filled the hall. Complete silence. Robert's hand stayed on the keys for a moment, then slowly lifted. He opened his eyes and looked out at the audience for the first time since he'd started playing. What he saw shocked him. Nearly everyone was crying. Some openly, with tears streaming down their faces. Others quietly wiping their eyes with napkins. Even people who'd looked at him with disgust earlier were crying now. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched on. Robert wondered if he'd done something wrong. If maybe they were just being polite, waiting for him to leave. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was Henry, the older man who'd lost his wife. His applause was slow at first, deliberate. Then others joined in. One by one, then in groups until the entire room was clapping. But it wasn't regular applause. People were standing up. A standing ovation for him, for Robert Hayes, the homeless man they'd judged and dismissed. Robert sat frozen on the piano bench, overwhelmed. He couldn't process what was happening. These people, these same people who'd looked at him like he was garbage an hour ago, were now on their feet applauding him. The applause grew louder. Some people were shouting, "Bravo!" A woman near the front was clapping so hard it must have hurt her hands. Robert felt his chest tighten. Emotion overwhelmed him. For 3 years he'd been invisible. For 3 years people had looked through him like he wasn't there, and now suddenly they saw him. Really saw him. Not as a homeless man or a problem to be solved, but as a person, as an artist, as someone who mattered. Tears began rolling down Robert's face. He couldn't stop them. Didn't want to stop them. All the pain of the last 15 years came pouring out. All the loneliness and shame and grief. But mixed in with the pain was something else. Something he'd almost forgotten the feeling of. Hope. Linda walked onto the stage and hugged Robert. He stiffened at first. Physical affection was rare in his world, but then he relaxed into it and more tears came. "Thank you," Linda whispered. "Thank you for sharing your gift with us." Robert couldn't speak. He just nodded against her shoulder. When Linda finally let go, she led Robert off the stage. The applause continued. As they walked through the hall toward the back room, people reached out to touch Robert's arm, his shoulder, offering connection, offering recognition. The little girl, Katie, broke free from her mother and ran up to Robert. "That was the most beautiful thing I ever heard," she said, her eyes wide and sincere. Robert knelt down to her level, his knees creaking. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot." Katie's mother, Jennifer, came up behind her daughter. "I'm sorry," she said to Robert, "for earlier, for pulling her away from you. I was wrong." Robert looked up at her. "You were just protecting your child." "I understand," Jennifer shook her head. "No, I was judging you. And I'm sorry." She held out her hand. Robert looked at it for a moment, then took it. A handshake. Such a simple thing. But it felt like forgiveness. As Linda led Robert to a quiet room backstage, the party continued in the hall. But it was different now. People weren't just making small talk anymore. They were having real conversations. About struggles. About loss. About the way we judge people without knowing their stories. Robert sat in a chair, exhausted. Playing had taken everything out of him, but it was a good exhaustion. The kind that comes from doing something that matters. Linda brought him water and some food from the buffet. Real food, warm food. Robert's hands shook as he ate. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a meal like this. "What happens now?" Robert asked quietly. Linda smiled. Now everything changes." Robert sat in the small backstage room, trying to process what had just happened. His hands were still trembling, but not from fear anymore. From adrenaline. From emotion. From the overwhelming sensation of being seen again after years of invisibility. Linda had given him space, but people kept knocking on the door. They wanted to meet him. To shake his hand. To tell him how his music had moved them. Robert wasn't used to this. For 3 years, people had avoided eye contact with him. Now they were seeking him out. There was a gentle knock and Linda poked her head in. "There's someone who'd like to talk to you. Is that okay?" Robert nodded and a young woman walked in. She looked to be in her mid-20s with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mr. Hayes? My name is Rachel Kim. I'm a reporter for the Portland Tribune." Robert's stomach dropped. A reporter? He looked down at his dirty clothes, suddenly aware again of how he must appear. "I don't know if I want to—" "Please," Rachel said quickly. "I'm not here to exploit you. I just think your story deserves to be told. On your terms." Robert studied her face. There was no judgment there. Just genuine interest. "What do you want to know?" Rachel sat down across from him. She didn't record anything or even take out a notepad. She just listened as Robert talked. And once he started, he couldn't stop. The words poured out like the music had. He told her about Catherine, about their life together, about her illness and the medical bills that came after, about the depression that swallowed him whole when she died, about losing his job, his apartment, his dignity, about the 3 years on the streets where every day was just about survival. "I forgot who I was," Robert said quietly. "I forgot I was ever anything more than just a homeless guy people step around. Until today. Today I remembered." Rachel's eyes were wet. "Would you be okay if I wrote about this?" "I think people need to hear it," Robert thought for a moment. A year ago, even a month ago, he would have said no. He would have wanted to stay invisible, safe in his anonymity. But something had shifted today. "Yes," he said. "You can write about it." What Robert didn't know was that several people had recorded his performance on their phones. As he sat talking to Rachel, those videos were already being uploaded to social media. Posted, shared, going viral in that mysterious way that happens when something touches people's hearts. By the time Robert left the community center that evening, his performance had been viewed thousands of times. By morning, it would be millions. Linda had given Robert $300 for playing. More money than he'd seen in months. She'd also given him her business card and made him promise to call her the next day. "I mean it, Robert. Please call me. We're going to help you." Robert walked back to his usual spot outside the shopping center, but everything felt different. The night air didn't seem as cold. The street didn't seem as lonely. He had $300 in his pocket and a business card with someone's phone number. Someone who saw him. Someone who cared. He sat down against his wall and looked at his hands. These hands had made music today. Real music that made people cry, made them feel, made them think. For a few hours he hadn't been a homeless man. He'd been a pianist, an artist, a human being with value. Robert pulled out his old blanket and wrapped it around himself. But sleep didn't come easily. His mind was too full, too alive. For the first time in years, he let himself imagine a different future. Maybe this didn't have to be his life forever. Maybe there was a way back. The next morning, everything changed. Robert woke to find people standing around him, not avoiding him, not pretending he wasn't there, actually standing there looking at him with recognition. "Are you the piano player?" a young man asked. "From the video?" Robert was confused. "What video?" The man showed him his phone. There was Robert at the piano playing. The video had millions of views, thousands of comments. People from all over the world were watching him play, commenting, sharing their own stories of loss and struggle and hope. Robert stared at the screen in disbelief. "How did this happen?" "You happened," the young man said. "That performance was incredible, man. You're like everywhere online right now." More people gathered. Some wanted selfies with him. Others just wanted to shake his hand. An older woman brought him coffee and a breakfast sandwich. "You deserve this," she said simply. Robert's phone, which he'd kept from his old life but rarely used because he had no one to call, started ringing. The number was local. He answered hesitantly. "Robert, this is Linda. Have you seen the news? People keep showing me videos." "I don't understand what's happening." Linda laughed, and it was a happy sound. "What's happening is that you touched people's hearts. The story is everywhere. And Robert, I've been getting calls all morning. People want to help you. Organizations, music schools, even the mayor's office called." Robert felt dizzy. This was too much, too fast. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll meet me for lunch. We have a lot to talk about." They met at a small diner downtown. Linda brought Tom, the event organizer, and a woman named Patricia who worked for a nonprofit helping homeless individuals. Robert felt overwhelmed by all the attention, but they were kind, patient. They didn't push. "We'd like to help you get back on your feet," Patricia explained. "We have programs for housing, job placement, mental health support. If you're interested." Robert's first instinct was to say no, to run. Change was terrifying, even good change. The streets were horrible, but they were familiar. Safe in their predictability. But then he remembered the feeling of playing piano again. Of being seen. Of being human. "Yes," he said. "I'm interested." The next few days were a whirlwind. The news story Rachel wrote went viral. Major networks picked it up. "Homeless pianist brings audience to tears," the headlines read. Robert's face was everywhere. People recognized him on the street. Not everyone's reaction was positive. Some people said it was a publicity stunt. Others questioned why one homeless person was getting so much attention when thousands suffered in silence. Robert understood their anger. He'd been one of the invisible ones for years. But he couldn't control what happened. He could only move forward. Patricia's organization helped Robert get a room at a transitional housing facility. It was small, just a bed and a desk and a bathroom, but it was his. 4 walls and a door that locked. Privacy, safety. The first night, Robert cried himself to sleep, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of being warm and alone. But housing was just the first step. Robert needed help with things he'd let fall apart. Patricia connected him with a therapist who specialized in grief and trauma. The first session was hard. Robert had built walls around his pain for so long that tearing them down felt impossible. But slowly he began to talk about Catherine. About the guilt he felt for giving up. About the shame of becoming homeless. "You didn't give up." His therapist, Dr. Helen Martinez, told him gently. "You survived the unsurvivable." That took incredible strength. Robert wasn't sure he believed her yet, but he kept going to therapy, kept showing up. Meanwhile, the music community was reaching out. A local music school offered him a part-time teaching position, working with students who couldn't afford lessons. The pay wasn't much, but it wasn't about the money. It was about doing what he loved again. Being who he was. Robert's first day teaching was terrifying. He stood in front of a piano with 3 students staring at him. Young kids, maybe 10 or 11 years old. They knew who he was. They'd seen the videos. "Mr. Hayes," one girl asked nervously. What should we play? Robert sat at the piano. His hands found the keys. First, I want to show you something. Music isn't just about hitting the right notes. It's about feeling. About telling a story. Let me show you. He played a simple scale, but he played it with emotion, with intention. The kids watched mesmerized. And Robert realized something. He was good at this. Not just playing, but teaching. Sharing this gift with others. Helping them find their own voices. After class, the little girl came up to him. Mr. Hayes, my dad left last year, and when you played that sad part in the middle, I felt like someone understood. Thank you. Robert knelt down to her level, just like he'd done with Katie. Music is good for that, for helping us feel less alone. Keep playing, okay? The world needs your music. That night, Robert returned to his small room at the housing facility. He had a job now. A purpose. People who cared about him. It wasn't a mansion or a fortune, but it was a start. It was hope. He pulled out his phone and looked at the videos again. Watched himself playing. Read some of the comments. Many were from people sharing their own struggles, their own losses, their own moments of falling down and trying to get back up. Your music saved me today, one comment read. I was ready to give up. But hearing you play reminded me that it's possible to survive. Robert felt tears on his face, good tears this time. He'd spent 3 years thinking he had nothing left to give the world, that he was just taking up space. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe his pain, his survival, his music could help someone else keep going. He thought about Catherine, about what she would say if she could see him now. She'd probably be crying and laughing at the same time, telling him she always knew he'd find his way back. That the music was always there, waiting for him to remember. I'm trying, Catherine, Robert whispered to the empty room. I'm really trying. And for the first time in 15 years, he believed he might actually be okay. 3 months had passed since that afternoon at the community center. 3 months since Robert's life had changed in ways he never imagined possible. But recovery wasn't a straight line. Some days were good. Some days were hard. And some days Robert still felt like that man sitting against the wall, invisible to the world. He woke up in his apartment. Not the transitional housing room anymore, but an actual apartment. Small, just a studio, but it was his. He'd signed the lease 2 weeks ago and he still couldn't quite believe it. Every morning he expected to wake up on the street, realizing it had all been a dream. Robert made coffee in his little kitchen. Another miracle. Hot coffee whenever he wanted it. He stood by the window watching the city wake up. From up here on the 4th floor, Portland looked different, cleaner, safer. But Robert knew what was down there. He knew because he'd lived it. His phone rang. It was Linda. She'd become more than just the woman who gave him a chance. She'd become a friend. One of the few he had. Morning, Robert. Just calling to remind you about tonight. The benefit concert. Are you ready? Robert's stomach flipped. Tonight, the concert. He'd agreed to perform at a benefit for homeless musicians and artists. It had seemed like a good idea when Linda suggested it. A way to give back. To use his story for something meaningful. But now, with the event just hours away, Robert felt terrified. I think so, he said, though his voice betrayed his doubt. You'll be wonderful. And Robert, there are some people who really want to meet you. Other musicians who've experienced homelessness. I think you'll like them. After the call, Robert sat at his keyboard. Not a grand piano like at the community center, but a simple electric keyboard that the music school had given him. He'd been practicing every day, relearning pieces he'd once known by heart. His fingers were stronger now, more confident, but the fear never quite went away. He played scales, warm-ups, then moved into more complex pieces. As he played, he thought about the last 3 months. The therapy sessions that had left him emotionally drained but somehow lighter. The teaching job that gave him purpose. The small apartment that gave him dignity. The meals that didn't come from dumpsters or charity lines. But he also thought about the struggles nobody saw. The nightmares that still woke him up. The panic attacks when he saw his bank account getting low. The guilt he felt every time he passed a homeless person on the street, knowing he'd gotten help while so many others hadn't. Survivor's guilt, Dr. Martinez called it. It was real and it was heavy. Robert stopped playing and looked at his hands. These hands had been given a second chance. What was he going to do with it? That afternoon he went for a walk. His therapist encouraged it. Exercise, fresh air, connecting with the world. Robert's path took him past his old spot outside the shopping center. He hadn't been back since that day with Linda. Part of him had been avoiding it. Someone was sitting there now. A younger man, maybe in his 30s, with a cardboard sign. Robert stopped. He could walk past. Most people did. But he didn't, he couldn't. "Hey," Robert said, sitting down next to the man. The man looked startled. People didn't usually sit with him. "Hey yourself. I'm Robert. I used to sit right here." The man studied him. "You're that piano guy. I've seen the videos. Everyone's seen the videos." "Yeah, that's me." They sat in silence for a moment. Then the young man said, "Must be nice." "Getting out. Making it." Robert heard the bitterness in his voice. He understood it. "What's your name?" "Kevin. Kevin, it's not magic. I got lucky. Someone took a chance on me, but there's help out there if you want it. Real help." Robert pulled out a card from his wallet. Patricia's card. The non-profit that had helped him. "Call this number. Tell them Robert Hayes sent you. They'll help." Kevin took the card but looked skeptical. "They've got programs, housing, job help. It's not easy and it takes time, but it's real. Why are you telling me this?" Robert thought about that. "Because I sat where you're sitting, and I know what it feels like to think there's no way out. But there is. It's hard and it's scary, but there is." Kevin pocketed the card. "Thanks, man." Robert stood up. "I mean it. Call them." As Robert walked away, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe this was part of his purpose now. Not just playing music, but remembering where he came from, helping others find their way out of the darkness. That evening, Robert arrived at the concert hall early. It was bigger than the community center. Much bigger. The stage looked enormous, intimidating. His hands started sweating. Linda found him backstage, pacing. "Robert, breathe. There are so many people out there, Linda. What if I freeze? What if it's not as good as last time?" "Then it's not as good. Robert, you're not performing to be perfect. You're performing to remind people that homeless individuals are human beings with talents and worth. Just be yourself." Other performers arrived. A woman named Teresa who sang and had lived in her car for 2 years. A man called Jackson who painted and had been on the streets for 5. A young person named Riley who wrote poetry and was still transitioning out of homelessness. Each had a story. Each had gifts the world had ignored until recently. They talked backstage, sharing experiences. The shame, the invisibility, the daily fight to survive, but also the creativity that never died. The art that kept them human even when the world treated them as less than human. "We're still here," Teresa said. "They tried to make us disappear, but we're still here." The concert began. Riley read their poetry first. Words raw and powerful about sleeping in doorways and being moved along by police. Jackson's paintings were displayed on screens, vibrant colors depicting both the beauty and horror of street life. Teresa sang a song she'd written about her children, the ones she'd lost custody of and was fighting to see again. Then it was Robert's turn. He walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, but he could see the audience. Hundreds of people. Some he recognized from the community center. Many he didn't. And in the front row he saw Kevin, the young man from outside the shopping center. He'd come. Robert sat at the grand piano. He looked out at the audience one more time. Then he began to speak. 3 months ago, I was homeless. I'd been homeless for 3 years. Most of you probably wouldn't have looked at me. I wouldn't have blamed you. I didn't look at myself either. I forgot I was a person. I forgot I had value. I forgot I had something to offer the world. His voice shook, but he continued. A woman named Linda saw me. Really saw me. She asked me to play piano, and I almost said no. I was terrified. But I said yes, and it changed my life. Robert paused. But here's what I need you to understand. I got lucky. There are thousands of people on these streets who have talents, who have worth, who have stories. They're artists and musicians and teachers and parents and human beings. They're not invisible. We just choose not to see them. Tonight isn't just about celebrating that I found my way back. It's about recognizing that every person struggling on these streets deserves a chance, deserves dignity. Has to be seen. Robert turned to the piano. This is for everyone who's still out there, for everyone who thinks they're invisible. You're not. I see you, he began to play. Not Chopin this time, not even his own composition for Catherine. He played something new, something he'd written in the last month. It was called Still Here. The melody captured struggle and survival, pain and resilience, the absolute refusal to give up even when giving up would be easier. The music swelled, each note carrying the weight of experience. The audience listened, many crying again. But these tears felt different. Not just sad, but also fierce, determined, angry at injustice, hopeful for change. When Robert finished, the applause was deafening. But more important than the applause was what came after. People approached the donation tables. They signed up to volunteer. They took information cards about homeless services. They really saw backstage afterward. Kevin found Robert. That was something, man. I made the call. To that number you gave me. I have an appointment tomorrow. Robert felt his chest tighten with emotion. That's great, Kevin. That's really great. I'm scared, Kevin admitted. I know. But you'll be okay. It won't be easy, but you'll be okay. Linda hugged Robert tight. You did it. You really did it. Robert looked around at the other performers, at the volunteers helping, at the people who had stayed to learn more about helping the homeless community. We did it. All of us. That night, Robert went home to his small apartment. He made tea and sat by his window. Down below, the city lights twinkled. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping on streets, in doorways, under bridges. Robert couldn't save them all. But maybe he could help people see them. Maybe his music could build bridges between the visible and invisible. He thought about Catherine, about how she'd always believed that music had the power to change things, to connect people, to heal. She'd been right. Robert wasn't naive. He knew his problems weren't all solved. He knew recovery was ongoing. He knew he'd have bad days ahead. Days when the darkness crept back in. Days when he'd struggle. But he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had people who cared. He had purpose. He had his music. And most importantly, he had hope. Robert picked up his phone and looked at the video from tonight's concert. People were already sharing it. Already commenting. Already being moved to action. One comment caught his eye. I walked past a homeless man today. For the first time, I stopped and talked to him. Asked his name. His story. Thank you for reminding me that we're all human. Robert smiled. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Not changing the world overnight, but changing how people saw each other. One conversation. One moment. One chance at a time. He set his phone down and looked at his hands again. Tomorrow he'd teach his piano students. Help them find their voices. Tomorrow he'd keep healing. Keep growing. Keep showing up. Tomorrow he'd keep being Robert Hayes, not the homeless man. Not the viral sensation. Just Robert. A human being with a gift to share and a purpose to fulfill. And that was more than enough.